Ruthless Billionaire CEO didn't let anyone touch him for years. Until the black maid came. Picture this, a man so damaged by his past that he hasn't let another human being touch him in 7 years. Not a handshake. Not a pat on the back. Nothing. Calvin H. Parkinson built a billion-dollar empire behind walls of steel and silk gloves, keeping the entire world at arm's length. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, a woman walked into his pristine penthouse office carrying nothing but a mop bucket and the kind of smile that could crack granite. What happened next? Well, that's why you need to stay until the end of this story. Before we dive in, if you're new here, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing our global family grow. And to my returning viewers, welcome back. You know how we do it here. This one's going to hit different, I promise you that. Now let's get into it. The pristine silence of the executive floor at Parkinson Industries was broken only by the soft hum of climate control and the distant ping of elevator arrivals. 38 floors above Charleston's historic district, Calvin H. Parkinson stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching the morning sun paint the Ashley River gold. He didn't turn when his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Parkinson, the new cleaning service is here for the walkthrough. Should I send them up?" Calvin's jaw tightened. Another change. Another disruption to his carefully controlled environment. "Give me 5 minutes." He pulled on his gloves, the soft, expensive kind that looked like a fashion statement but served a much darker purpose. 7 years. That's how long it had been since he'd felt another person's skin against his own. 7 years since the accident that had killed his wife and left him with a phobia so profound that even his therapist had eventually admitted defeat. The world called him ruthless. Brilliant. A visionary who'd transformed his family's modest construction company into a sustainable architecture empire worth $3 billion. They didn't know that every handshake he'd avoided, every business deal conducted from behind a desk, every conference call instead of a face-to-face meeting, it was all carefully orchestrated to hide the truth. Calvin H. Parkinson was terrified of human touch. "Send them up," he said finally, moving to his desk and putting its solid barrier between himself and whoever was coming. The elevator chimed. Calvin heard his assistant Sarah's voice, professional and clipped, giving instructions. Then footsteps. Multiple sets. He didn't look up from his computer screen, though he wasn't actually reading anything on it. "Mr. Parkinson, this is the team from Prestige Cleaning Services. They'll be taking over the executive floor maintenance starting today." "Fine." Calvin still didn't look up. "Sarah will show you the protocols. Don't touch anything on my desk. Don't move anything in my office. The schedule is posted in the break room." "Actually, sir, I'm the only one assigned to your office." That voice. It cut through his concentration like sunlight through fog, warm, clear, completely unintimidated by his deliberate coldness. Calvin's eyes lifted from his screen. She stood in his doorway like she belonged there. A black woman, maybe 34 or 35, with her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun that somehow made her look both professional and effortlessly beautiful. She wore the standard gray uniform of the cleaning service, but on her, it looked intentional, chosen. Her skin was a rich brown that reminded him of the mahogany furniture in his grandmother's old house. But it was her eyes that caught him, warm and direct, holding his gaze without flinching. Most people looked away from Calvin within seconds. His cold stare, perfected over years of keeping the world at a distance, usually sent the message loud and clear: "Don't get close." This woman smiled instead. "Georgia Dehner," she said, not extending her hand. "Thank God," but nodding respectfully. "I understand you have specific requirements for your workspace. I read through all the protocols. I won't touch your desk, I'll work around your schedule, and I'll be invisible. That's what the note said, right? Be invisible." "That's correct." Calvin's voice came out colder than he'd intended. He softened it fractionally. "How long have you been with Prestige?" "Started yesterday." George's smile never wavered. But I've been cleaning offices for 10 years. Trust me, Mr. Parkinson, I've worked for people way more particular than you. Calvin doubted that. We'll see. Yes, we will. She turned to Sarah. Should I start with the outer offices or work my way in? Work your way in, Calvin said before Sarah could answer. I have calls starting in 30 minutes. I need this office quiet by then. Understood. Georgia nodded once, then disappeared from his doorway. Calvin tried to return to work, but he found himself distracted by the sounds of her moving through the outer offices. She was efficient, he'd give her that. No unnecessary noise, no chatter with Sarah, just the soft sounds of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. 25 minutes later, she appeared in his doorway again. I'm ready to start in here, but I can come back if you're not finished with your calls. I haven't started yet. Go ahead. Calvin stood, preparing to relocate to the conference room. You don't have to leave, Georgia said, wheeling in her cart. I can work around you. I prefer to be alone. I know. It's in the notes. She started at the far end of the office, wiping down the built-in shelves that held his awards and architectural models. But you're going to have calls. I'm going to have to learn to be here while you're working. Might as well start now. Calvin opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She wasn't wrong. And there was something in the matter-of-fact way she said it that disarmed his usual reflexive dismissal. He sat back down, pulling his laptop closer, and tried to focus on the financial reports in front of him. But his attention kept drifting to the woman moving through his space with quiet confidence. You know, Georgia said after 15 minutes of silence, most people would have kicked me out by now. Calvin's fingers paused over his keyboard. What? I said most people who want to be alone would have kicked me out by now. She was cleaning the windows now, her back to him. But you're still here. Makes me think maybe you don't hate company as much as those notes suggested. Maybe you just hate something else. The observation was too close, too perceptive. Calvin felt his defenses slam up. You're here to clean, Ms. Dehner. Not to psychoanalyze. Fair enough. She didn't sound offended. Just making conversation. Silence gets loud after a while, you know. He didn't respond, but privately, Calvin acknowledged that she was right about that too. The silence in his life had become deafening. He'd just gotten so used to it that he'd forgotten how to listen to anything else. His phone buzzed. A text from his best friend and company VP, Landry. New cleaning lady is cute. You planning to fire her by end of week like the last 3? Calvin typed back. Mind your business. That's a yes. $20 says she quits before you can fire her. That Ice King routine is getting old, man. Calvin pocketed his phone without responding. Let Landry think what he wanted. No one understood why Calvin kept his distance, and he preferred it that way. The truth was too complicated, too painful, too pathetic for a 38-year-old billionaire to admit. All done, Georgia announced, startling him from his thoughts. Same time tomorrow? Yes. Calvin glanced up briefly. His office was immaculate, as expected. But there was something else. It smelled different. Not the usual harsh chemical smell of industrial cleaning products, but something softer. Lavender, maybe. What is that scent? Essential oils. I mix them into my cleaning solutions. Lavender and eucalyptus. It's calming. Georgia paused at the door. Unless you'd prefer the industrial stuff? I can switch. No. The word came out too quickly. Calvin cleared his throat. It's fine. Good, actually. Georgia's smile widened just a fraction. See you tomorrow, Mr. Parkinson. After she left, Calvin sat in his office for a long time, staring at nothing. For the first time in 7 years, his space didn't feel quite so much like a fortress. It felt almost like a home. And that terrified him more than anything. Georgia arrived at 6:45 the next morning, 15 minutes earlier than Calvin had specified. He was already at his desk. He was always at his desk by 6, and he looked up in surprise when she wheeled her cart past his open door. "You're early," he said. "Wanted to get a head start. I've got another office building after this one." She paused, then added, "Is that okay? I can wait in the break room if you need the extra quiet time." Calvin considered. The logical answer was yes. Make her wait. Stick to the schedule. Maintain boundaries. But there was something about her presence that wasn't intrusive the way he'd expected. She moved through space like water, filling it without demanding anything from it. "It's fine," he heard himself say. "Proceed." Over the next hour, as Georgia worked through the outer offices, Calvin found himself actually getting things done. Usually, his mornings were a battle against his own mind, thoughts spiraling, anxiety building, the walls of his office feeling simultaneously too close and not protective enough. But today, with the soft sounds of Georgia working in the background, his thoughts stayed linear. Focused. It was unsettling. By 7:30, she'd made her way to his office. This time, she didn't ask if he wanted her to come back later. She just started working, beginning with the credenza behind his desk. "Can I ask you something?" Georgia's voice was casual, conversational. Calvin tensed. "That depends on the question." "The gloves." She nodded toward his hands. "Fashion choice or something else?" Every instinct screamed at him to shut down the conversation. But there was no judgment in her voice, just curiosity. Honest, straightforward curiosity. "Something else," he said carefully. "Okay." Georgia moved to the shelves. "My grandmama used to wear gloves every day. Said her hands got cold easy after the accident." Calvin's head snapped up. "What accident?" "House fire. Long time ago. She got everyone out, but her hands got burned pretty bad. The gloves helped her feel, I don't know, safe, I guess. Like she had control over something." Georgia glanced at him. "Sorry. I'm not trying to pry. I just figured if you wanted to talk about it, you'd tell me. And if you didn't, well, that's fine too." The words hung in the air between them. Calvin could have ended the conversation right there. Should have. But something about the way she'd shared her grandmother's story without making it about him, without pushing, made him want to offer something back. "I don't like being touched," he said quietly. "Haven't for a long time." "Okay." George's voice was matter-of-fact, accepting. "That's valid. That's it. No follow-up questions. No sympathetic look. No awkward attempt at comfort. Just acceptance." Calvin felt something shift in his chest. Something small but significant, like the first crack in a dam. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not making it a thing." Georgia smiled, that same warm, genuine smile that had caught him off guard yesterday. "Mr. Parkinson, everybody's got something. Your something just happens to involve personal space. Mine's heights. Can't do tall buildings without feeling like I'm going to pass out. Good thing I work on executive floors and not windows." Despite himself, Calvin felt his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close enough that he felt it. "This is the 38th floor. And I took the elevator with my eyes closed and my headphones on full blast." Georgia laughed. "We all got our ways of coping." For the first time in 7 years, Calvin didn't feel quite so alone with his. The rest of the week fell into an unexpected rhythm. Georgia arrived early. Calvin worked while she cleaned. They exchanged occasional observations, nothing too personal, nothing too probing, but enough that the silence between them felt comfortable rather than cold. On Friday, Georgia brought coffee. "I noticed you drink it black," she said, setting a cup on the corner of his desk. Not close enough to invade his space, but close enough to reach. "Figured you might want something better than that motor oil from the break room." Calvin stared at the cup like it was a foreign object. When was the last time someone had brought him coffee? When was the last time someone had noticed what he drank, how he took it, what he might want? You didn't have to do that, he said. I know. I wanted to. Georgia started her usual routine. Plus, I'm bribing you. I need to leave an hour early next Friday. My daughter has a school thing. There it was. A daughter. Of course. Someone like Georgia, warm, capable, grounded. Of course she had a full life outside these walls. Calvin felt a strange twist in his chest. Not quite jealousy, but something adjacent to it. How old? He asked. 9. Her name's Amara. She's in the science fair, building a model solar system. Very serious about making sure Jupiter's moons are to scale. Georgia's voice was full of pride and affection. She gets that from her daddy. He was an engineer before. She trailed off, and Calvin heard the weight of an unfinished sentence. Before? He prompted, surprising himself. Before the cancer took him. 3 years ago. Georgia kept working, her movements steady. Amara was 6. Old enough to remember him, young enough that the memories are starting to fade. That's the hardest part. Watching her forget. Calvin knew about loss. He understood the weight of it, the way it changed the architecture of your entire life. I'm sorry. Me too. Georgia paused at the window, looking out at the Charleston skyline. But we're managing. That's what you do, right? You manage. You cope. You keep moving forward because the alternative is standing still, and standing still never helped anybody. Her words settled into Calvin's chest like seeds in fertile soil. He'd been standing still for 7 years. Calling it protection. Calling it caution. But maybe it was just fear wearing a more acceptable name. Take the time you need next Friday, he said. In fact, take the whole day. I'll make sure you're paid for it. Georgia turned from the window, surprise flickering across her face. That's generous. But I only need an hour. Take the day, Ms. Dehner. Spend it with your daughter. Science fairs are important. For a moment, Georgia just looked at him. Really looked at him, like she was seeing something he usually kept hidden. Then she smiled, not her usual warm smile, but something softer, more grateful. Thank you, Mr. Parkinson. That means a lot. After she left, Calvin sat at his desk holding the now lukewarm coffee she'd brought him. He didn't drink it. He just held it, feeling the heat seep through his gloves, wondering when the walls he'd built so carefully had started feeling less like protection and more like a prison. Question for you. Have you ever built walls to protect yourself, only to realize they were keeping out the very things you needed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories. The following Monday, Georgia didn't show up. Calvin noticed immediately. 6:45 came and went. 7 o'clock. 7:15. By 7:30, he'd checked his phone 6 times and walked past Sarah's desk twice. Casual, like he was getting coffee, definitely not looking for answers about why his cleaning person wasn't there. She called in, Sarah said without looking up from her computer. Said she'd be here by 8:30. Some issue with her daughter's school. Fine. Calvin returned to his office, annoyed at himself for caring. So what if Georgia was late? People were late. It happened. It didn't matter. Except it did. The morning felt wrong without her there. The silence was too heavy. His coffee from the break room tasted like dirt. He couldn't focus. At 8:40, he heard the elevator. Footsteps, faster than usual, a little uneven. Then Georgia appeared in his doorway, slightly breathless, still wearing her jacket over her uniform. I'm so sorry, she said. Amara's school called. Some kid said something stupid, she reacted. There was a whole thing. I had to go down there and... She stopped, shook her head. I'm sorry. I should have called earlier. I'll make up the time. Calvin noticed the tightness around her eyes. The way her smile didn't quite reach its usual wattage. Is Amara all right? She will be. Georgia set down her cart with more force than necessary. Some boy told her that her hair looked like a rat's nest. So she told him his face looked like it got stung by bees. Then he shoved her. Then she shoved him back. Now they're both suspended for physical altercation. She made air quotes, frustration bleeding through her professional demeanor. Never mind that he started it. Never mind that she was defending herself. She's 9 years old and now she's got a suspension on her record because some kid doesn't understand that natural hair isn't something to mock. The words spilled out in a rush, and Calvin could see Georgia trying to rein herself back in, to remember who she was talking to. But something in him cracked wider. That's absurd, he said. She was defending herself. Try telling that to the principal. Georgia pulled off her jacket, hanging it carefully on her cart. Sorry. You don't need to hear about my problems. Let me just. Stop apologizing. Calvin stood, surprising them both. You're 30 minutes late because you were dealing with your daughter's school. That's not a problem. That's life. And for what it's worth, Amara was right to defend herself. Georgia blinked. The school seems to think she should have used her words. Words don't always work with bullies. Calvin heard his own voice, harder now, edged with something old and bitter. Sometimes you have to show them you won't be pushed around. Something shifted in Georgia's expression. Understanding, maybe. Recognition of shared experience. You sound like someone who knows about that. I was small for my age until high school, and I had. Calvin hesitated, then pushed forward, sensory issues. Didn't like loud noises, certain textures, being touched. Made me an easy target. What changed? Georgia asked softly. I got bigger. Started fighting back. Built walls thick enough that people couldn't reach me. He paused. Sometimes I think I built them too well. The admission hung in the air. Calvin couldn't believe he'd said it out loud. But Georgia didn't look shocked or pitying. She just nodded, like she understood exactly what he meant. Walls keep things out, she said. But they also keep things in. My mama used to say that. She'd tell me, baby, if you lock yourself up tight, nobody can hurt you. But nobody can love you either. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Georgia's voice went soft. Lost her 4 years ago. Heart failure. It was fast, that's what everyone kept telling me. Like that made it better. Like it hurting less time meant it hurt less overall. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate. Calvin wanted to say more, to tell her he understood that particular geometry of loss, the way it carved out spaces in you that never quite filled back in. But he didn't have the words. Georgia seemed to hear them anyway. Thank you. Some days are harder than others. But I've got Amara, and she's got me, and we make it work. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. Georgia picked up her cleaning supplies, her professional mask sliding back into place. Now let me earn my paycheck before you decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth. Georgia. Her name felt strange in his mouth. Intimate, somehow. He'd been calling her Ms. Dehner all week. You're not trouble. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Good to know, Calvin. The sound of his first name, spoken so casually, so warmly, sent a jolt through him. No one called him Calvin. It was always Mr. Parkinson, or Sir, or if they were feeling particularly bold, Cal. But never just Calvin, said like that, like she had the right to it. Like she knew him. He should correct her. Maintain professional boundaries. Keep the walls up. Instead, he sat back down and returned to his work, listening to her move through his space, and feeling those walls crack just a little bit more. Over the next 2 weeks, something shifted between them. Conversations got longer. Personal details slipped out more easily. Calvin learned that Georgia loved jazz, hated mornings despite waking up early every day, and made the best sweet potato pie in Charleston, according to Amara, who was very particular about her pies. Georgia learned that Calvin had been married once, that he'd lost his wife in a car accident 7 years ago, that he still had nightmares about it sometimes. She learned that he played piano but hadn't touched one since the funeral. That his favorite building was the Guggenheim, even though everyone expected him to say something more obscure. That he secretly liked reality TV, the trashier the better. No way, Georgia laughed when he admitted it. The ruthless Calvin Parkinson watches The Real Housewives? It's anthropological research, Calvin said dryly. Studying human behavior in artificially constructed environments. Aha! And which wife is your favorite? Calvin almost smiled. Almost. I refuse to answer on the grounds that it might incriminate me. So you do have a favorite. Georgia's laugh was warm and genuine, and Calvin realized he'd been trying to make her laugh. When had that started? Get back to work, Ms. Dehner. It's Georgia, remember? And you're avoiding the question. But she went back to cleaning, still smiling. Calvin pretended to work while actually watching her reflection in his computer screen. She moved with such ease through his space now, comfortable enough to joke with him, to tease him gently, to treat him like a human being instead of a volatile bomb that might explode at any moment. Most people walked on eggshells around Calvin. Georgia walked like she owned the place. It should have bothered him. Instead, he found himself looking forward to her arrivals, timing his most tedious work for when she'd be there, her presence somehow making everything more bearable. Can I ask you something? Georgia said one morning, about 3 weeks after they'd met. Calvin had learned that this phrasing meant she was about to ask something personal. He should shut it down. He nodded instead. Go ahead. Why architecture? Of all the things you could have done with your family's money, why sustainable buildings? No one had ever asked him that. They assumed it was about the money, or the prestige, or continuing his father's legacy. But Georgia asked like she actually wanted to know. My wife, Calvin said quietly. Rebecca. She was an environmental scientist. Used to go on these passionate rants about carbon footprints and climate change and how the construction industry was killing the planet. He stared at his gloved hands. After she died, I kept thinking about all the things she'd wanted to change. All the fights she'd wanted to fight. So I started fighting them for her. That's beautiful, Georgia said softly. It's guilt, Calvin corrected. She died because I was driving. Because I looked away for 2 seconds to answer my phone. Because I was more concerned about a business deal than keeping her safe. So now I build buildings that would have made her happy, and I tell myself it counts for something. The confession hung heavy in the air. Calvin had never said that out loud. Not to his therapist, not to Landry, not to anyone. But Georgia had this way of pulling truths out of him, gentle and inevitable as a tide. You know what I think. Georgia set down her cleaning cloth and leaned against his credenza. I think you're doing exactly what she'd want. Not because of guilt, but because you loved her. Because you still love her. And love doesn't just end because someone dies. It transforms. It finds new ways to exist. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. My husband, Marcus. She stopped, smiled sadly. See, I almost said, my late husband, but that sounds so formal. Marcus. His name was Marcus. He was the best man I ever knew, and when he died, I thought that was it. Love was over for me. I'd had my shot and the universe took it back. But, Calvin prompted. But then I realized love isn't a finite resource. The love I had for Marcus, it didn't disappear. It just shifted. It goes into Amara now. Into my work. Into how I move through the world. Into the way I treat people. She looked at him directly. Into the way I bring you coffee every morning because I know you won't take care of yourself otherwise. Calvin felt something warm bloom in his chest. Dangerous. Terrifying. Georgia. I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable, she continued. I'm saying it because I think you've been punishing yourself for 7 years. And maybe it's time to stop. I don't know how, Calvin admitted. Start small. Georgia picked up her cloth again. Tomorrow, don't wear the gloves. His hands clenched instinctively. I can't. Not all day. Just for 5 minutes. When I'm here. Let yourself feel the desk under your palms, the keyboard, the coffee cup. Just for 5 minutes. She caught his eye. Can you do that? Every instinct screamed no. But Calvin found himself nodding. 5 minutes. Good. Georgia's smile was proud, warm, like he'd accomplished something remarkable instead of just agreeing to take off his gloves for 5 minutes. That's good, Calvin. That night, Calvin lay in bed in his empty penthouse, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Georgia's words. About love transforming. About walls that keep everything in and nothing out. About 5 minutes without gloves. About the way she said his name like it was something precious. And for the first time in 7 years, Calvin H. Parkinson let himself imagine what it might feel like to be touched again. Have you ever had someone walk into your life and make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because trust me, things are about to get intense. The next morning, Calvin arrived at his office at 5:30 instead of his usual 6. He sat at his desk in the dark, staring at his gloved hands, wondering if he'd lost his mind somewhere between Georgia's challenge and now. 5 minutes without gloves. Such a small thing. People went their entire lives without gloves. But for Calvin, they were armor. They were safety. They were the only thing standing between him and the crushing anxiety that human contact brought. When Georgia arrived at 6:45, he was still sitting there, gloves on, feeling like a coward. "Morning," she called, her voice bright. Then she appeared in his doorway and stopped. "You okay? You look like you're about to jump off a bridge." "I'm fine." His voice came out rough. "Just thinking." Georgia wheeled her cart in, studying him with those perceptive eyes. "About the gloves? I can't do it." The words burst out. "I know I said I would, but I can't. It's been 7 years, Georgia. 7 years since I've touched anything without them. What if? What if what?" She set down her supplies and moved closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "What if you feel something? What if it's uncomfortable? What if it triggers a panic attack?" "Yes," Calvin said tightly. "All of that. Then we'll deal with it. I'm not going anywhere." Georgia pulled over a chair and sat down, still maintaining space between them. "But I need you to tell me something honestly. Do you want to take them off? Not because I challenged you, not because you think you should, but because you actually want to." Did he? Calvin examined the question carefully. For 7 years, the gloves had been non-negotiable. But lately, especially with Georgia around, he'd found himself noticing their presence more. The barrier they created between him and the world. The way they made even simple tasks complicated. The way they would make touching her impossible. The thought startled him. Where had that come from? "I want to," he said slowly. "I'm just scared." "That's honest. I respect that." Georgia stood. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to clean your office like normal. You're going to take off your gloves and put them on your desk where you can see them. If you need them back, they're right there. No judgment. No pressure. Just 5 minutes of seeing if you can do it. What if I can't? Then you put them back on and we try again another day." She smiled. "Calvin, there's no failure here. There's only trying." He wanted to believe her. Calvin took a deep breath, then another. Slowly, carefully, he peeled off his right glove. The air against his bare skin felt strange. Too cool. Too present. He set the glove on his desk and stared at his naked hand like it belonged to someone else. "Good," Georgia said quietly. Now the other one. The left glove came off easier. Or maybe just faster, like ripping off a bandage. Calvin set it next to its partner and pressed both palms flat against his desk. Wood. He felt wood. The grain and texture of it, the slight coolness of the surface, the solid reality of it. When was the last time he'd felt his own desk? How does it feel? Georgia had started cleaning, giving him something else to focus on. Strange. Foreign. Calvin flexed his fingers. But not bad. Not as bad as I thought. That's good. Keep going. 5 minutes stretched into 10. Calvin touched things deliberately, his keyboard, his pen, his coffee cup. Each sensation was overwhelming and underwhelming simultaneously. Nothing terrible happened. No panic attack. No flashbacks. Just the simple reality of touching objects without a barrier. I'm going to try something, Georgia said, and before Calvin could ask what, she'd set down her cleaning cloth and walked over to his side of the desk. She didn't touch him, but she was closer than she'd ever been. Close enough that he could smell her perfume, something warm and vanilla. What are you doing? His voice came out breathier than intended. Testing a theory. Georgia held out her hand, palm up, hovering in the space between them. I'm not going to touch you. But if you wanted to touch me, if you were ready, all you'd have to do is reach out. Your choice. Your control. Your timeline. Calvin stared at her hand like it was a live wire. Dark skin, elegant fingers, a small scar on her palm that looked old. Her hands looked soft. Capable. Real. He wanted to touch her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. For 7 years, he'd been terrified of human contact, and now he wanted nothing more than to close the distance between his bare palm and hers. I can't, he whispered. Okay. Georgia pulled her hand back immediately, no disappointment in her voice. That's okay. You did amazing today, Calvin. 10 minutes without gloves. That's huge. I wanted to, he said urgently, needing her to understand. I wanted to reach for you. I just couldn't make my hand move. I know. Her smile was gentle. But wanting to is the first step. The rest will come. After she left, Calvin sat at his desk with his bare hands still pressed against the wood, wondering when he'd started falling for his cleaning lady, and what he was possibly going to do about it. 2 days later, Calvin was still taking off his gloves every morning for progressively longer periods. It got easier each time. Not easy, but easier. His hands felt less foreign. The world felt less threatening. Georgia noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything. You're getting braver, she said on Thursday morning, nodding at his bare hands on the keyboard. Or more reckless. Calvin saved the email he'd been writing and looked up at her. Really looked at her. When had she become beautiful to him? Or had she always been beautiful and he'd just been too locked in his own fear to see it? There's a difference. Georgia was cleaning his windows, her back to him, but he could hear the smile in her voice. Bravery is calculated risk. Recklessness is just risk. Calvin stood, surprising himself, and walked over to where she was working. Not too close. But closer than usual. Which one do you think I'm doing? Georgia turned, and suddenly they were face to face, only a few feet apart. Her eyes widened slightly, and Calvin saw something flicker there. Awareness, maybe. Or recognition of the shift happening between them. I think, she said carefully, that you're doing exactly what you need to do. And I think you're doing it for the right reasons. What reasons? Because you're tired of being lonely. Because life is short. Because somewhere along the way, you remembered that you're still alive and maybe that means something. She held his gaze. Am I close? Very. Calvin's voice dropped lower. Georgia, I need to tell you something. Okay. She set down her cleaning cloth, giving him her full attention. I look forward to your arrivals now. I time my work around when you'll be here. I bring coffee from home because yours is better, but I pretend I'm still drinking the breakroom sludge so you'll keep bringing me some. The words tumbled out faster. I think about you when you're not here. I wonder what you're doing, if Amara's okay, if you're happy. And I know that's inappropriate. You work for me, technically for the cleaning company, but still, and I know I should keep this professional. But I need you to know that when I take off these gloves, when I push myself to be braver, it's not just about healing. It's about... He trailed off, unable to say it. About me. Georgia finished softly. Yes. Calvin's heart was hammering. About the possibility that maybe, someday, I could touch you without fear. That I could. What? Hold her hand. Embrace her. More. Be close to you. The silence stretched. Calvin watched emotions flicker across George's face. Surprise, something that might have been pleasure, then concern. Calvin. She said his name like it hurt. I need to be honest with you. His stomach dropped. You're going to quit. No. God, no. She laughed, but it sounded almost pained. The opposite. I need to tell you that I feel it too. Whatever this is. I've felt it for weeks now, and I've been trying to ignore it because you're right, this is complicated. But I can't keep pretending I don't notice the way you look at me sometimes. Or the way my whole day feels better when I'm here. Or the way I've started taking extra care with how I look in the mornings, even though I'm just cleaning offices. Calvin's breath caught. You feel it too. I do. But we have to be smart about this. Georgia stepped back, putting professional distance between them again. I need this job. I'm a single mother with a 9-year-old daughter and medical bills from my husband's cancer treatment that I'm still paying off 3 years later. I can't afford to lose this position because we got caught up in something and it went south. The practical reality of her words hit him hard. Of course. She wasn't a billionaire with infinite options. She had real life, real bills, real consequences to consider. I would never fire you, Calvin said. Regardless of what happened between us. You say that now. But what if we try this and it doesn't work? What if it gets messy? George's voice was gentle but firm. I've already lost one man I loved, Calvin. I can't do that again. And Amara, she's already attached to the idea of you. She asks about Mr. Parkinson at dinner. About your buildings, your work. If I let this happen and it falls apart, it's not just me who gets hurt. Then we'll be careful, Calvin said. We'll go slowly. You still can't touch me. The words were quiet but devastating. Calvin, you're making incredible progress with the gloves, and I'm so proud of you. But we both know you're not ready for physical intimacy. And I need that. I'm 34 years old, and I've been alone for 3 years. And when I finally open myself up to someone again, I need to know they can actually be with me. Fully. Without barriers. She was right. The truth of it burned through him. Calvin could barely touch a desk without anxiety. How could he possibly be in a relationship? How could he hold her, kiss her, be with her the way she deserved? I'll fix it, he said desperately. I'll go back to therapy. I'll work harder. Calvin, stop. Georgia's voice was kind but unyielding. You can't fix 7 years of trauma in a few weeks just because you want to be with someone. That's not how healing works. And I won't be the reason you push yourself too hard and break. So what are you saying? That we can't even try. I'm saying we wait. You work on yourself because you want to be whole again, not because you want to be with me. And if we're both still feeling this way in a few months, if you've made real progress and we still want to explore it, then we talk about it again. She grabbed her cleaning cart, and Calvin recognized the gesture as retreat. But right now, I need to be your cleaning lady. And you need to be my client. That's all we can be. She left before he could argue. Left him standing in his pristine office with his bare hands and his breaking heart, wondering how something that felt so right could be so impossible. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met the right person at the wrong time? Sometimes timing is everything, isn't it? Drop your stories below, I want to hear them. For 2 weeks, they existed in painful limbo. Georgia still arrived every morning. Calvin still took off his gloves. They still talked, but carefully now, both of them aware of the line they couldn't cross. It was torture. Calvin threw himself into therapy with renewed vigor. Dr. Matthews, his therapist who'd given up on him 2 years ago, was surprised to see him back. "What changed?" she asked in their first session. "I met someone," Calvin admitted. "Someone who makes me want to be better. Someone who makes the walls feel less like protection and more like prison." "Tell me about her." So he did. He told Dr. Matthews about Georgia's warmth, her wisdom, her strength. About Amara and Marcus and the way Georgia had somehow made him feel seen for the first time in 7 years. About the gloves and the 5 minutes and the almost touch that still haunted him. "You're in love with her," Dr. Matthews said. Not a question. Yes. The admission should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like relief. "I'm in love with her, and I can't even hold her hand. Yet," Dr. Matthews corrected. "You can't hold her hand yet. But Calvin, you've made more progress in the last month than you did in 3 years of therapy before. That's not coincidence. Love is a powerful motivator." She doesn't want to wait. She's already lost one person she loved. She doesn't want to invest in someone who might never be whole. Is that what she said? Or is that what you're afraid she thinks? Calvin paused. "She said we should wait until I'm ready. Until I've healed." That sounds like someone who cares deeply about you and wants you to heal for the right reasons. Dr. Matthews leaned forward. "Calvin, I want to try something. Exposure therapy, but gradual. Are you willing?" Over the next 10 days, Calvin pushed himself harder than he ever had. He started shaking hands with business contacts, fighting through the anxiety. He went to a massage therapist and made it through 15 minutes before panic overtook him. He held Landry's daughter during a work event and only had a minor freakout afterward. But he couldn't touch Georgia. She was too important. The stakes were too high. What if he tried and failed? What if his fear ruined everything? On Friday morning, 3 weeks after their conversation, Georgia arrived to find Calvin's office door closed. That never happened. She knocked softly. "Come in." Calvin's voice was rough. She found him sitting at his desk, head in his hands, his bare hands. No gloves. The gloves were lying on the floor like discarded armor. "Hey." Georgia set down her cart. "What's wrong?" "I can't do this anymore." Calvin's voice was raw. "I've been trying so hard, Georgia. Therapy, exposure exercises, pushing myself every single day. And I've made progress, I have. But it's not enough. I still can't." He gestured helplessly between them. "You're right here, every morning, and I want to touch you so badly it physically hurts. But I'm still terrified." Georgia moved closer, careful but concerned. "Calvin, what happened?" "Landry's wife had their baby yesterday. A little girl. They brought her to the office this morning, and everyone was passing her around, and when they handed her to me, his voice broke. I froze. I couldn't hold her. I handed her back and made some excuse, and I saw the way they looked at me. Like I was broken. Like I was pathetic." "You're not pathetic. I'm 38 years old and I can't hold a baby because the thought of human contact sends me into a panic. What does that make me if not pathetic?" He finally looked up at her, and Georgia saw tears tracking down his face. "I'm falling in love with you, and I can't even offer you something as basic as holding your hand. What kind of future is that?" The words hung in the air. Georgia felt her own tears starting. This beautiful, brilliant, broken man, crying in his office because he wanted to touch her and couldn't. Because he thought he wasn't enough. "Calvin." She said his name firmly. "Stand up." "What?" "Stand up. Right now." Confused, he stood. Georgia moved closer, stopping just inches away from him. Close enough to feel his warmth. Close enough to see the gold flecks in his hazel eyes. I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly, she said. Do you trust me? Yes. No hesitation. Do you want to touch me right now? More than anything. Then close your eyes. Calvin hesitated, then obeyed. Georgia studied his face, the tension in his jaw, the rapid pulse in his neck, the tear tracks drying on his cheeks. This man who'd built an empire. This man who'd lost everything and rebuilt himself into something harder, colder, safer. This man who was trying so hard to be soft again. Keep them closed, she said softly. I'm going to touch you now. Just my hand on yours. If it's too much, if you panic, just say stop and I'll move away immediately. Okay. Okay. His voice was barely a whisper. Georgia reached out slowly, giving him time to track her movement even with his eyes closed. Her fingertips brushed his first. Just that, the lightest contact. Skin on skin. Calvin gasped. His whole body went rigid. Breathe. Georgia murmured. Just breathe through it. I'm right here. She watched him fight through it. Watched him battle years of conditioning and fear and trauma. Watched him choose to stay instead of retreat. Slowly, carefully, she pressed her palm against his. Their fingers intertwined. His hand was trembling, but he didn't pull away. Georgia, he whispered, and his voice broke on her name. I'm here. She squeezed his hand gently. I'm right here, and you're doing so well. You're touching me, Calvin. You're actually touching me. A sob tore from his throat. Then, another. And then he was crying in earnest, his free hand coming up to cover his face, but his other hand stayed locked with hers, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. Georgia stepped closer and wrapped her free arm around him, pulling him into an embrace. He stiffened for only a second before collapsing against her, his face buried in her shoulder, his body shaking with 7 years of pent-up grief and fear and desperate longing for human connection. I've got you, she whispered, running her hand up and down his back. I've got you, and I'm not letting go. They stood like that for a long time. Eventually, Calvin's tears slowed. His breathing evened out. But he didn't let go. Neither did she. I'm touching you, he said against her shoulder, wonder in his voice. You are. I'm hugging you. You are. I don't want to stop. Then don't. Georgia pulled back just enough to see his face. His eyes were red, his cheeks wet, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. Calvin, can I tell you something? Anything. I lied before. When I said we should wait. The truth is, I've been in love with you for weeks. I was just scared. Scared of losing another person I care about. Scared of my daughter getting attached to someone who might leave. Scared that I was reading too much into coffee and conversations and the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. She cupped his face with her free hand, her thumb wiping away the last of his tears. But watching you fight so hard to heal, to be brave, to reach for me even when you're terrified, Calvin, that's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen anyone do. Georgia. Her name was a prayer on his lips. I'm not saying this will be easy. You're still healing. I still have a daughter to think about. There are real complications to navigate. But if you're willing to try, if you're willing to be patient with yourself and let me be patient with you, she smiled through her own tears. Then I want to try. I want to see where this goes. Calvin's response was to kiss her. It was clumsy and uncertain, their first kiss. He was trembling, and she could feel the effort it took him not to pull away. But his lips were soft against hers, and the way he held her, like she was something precious, something worth fighting for, made her heart ache. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Calvin rested his forehead against hers. I'm still terrified, he admitted. Me too, Georgia said. But maybe we can be terrified together. Together. He tested the word. I like the sound of that. They stood in his office, holding each other, as the morning sun painted everything gold. Outside, Charleston was waking up. Somewhere, Amara was at school learning about planets and proper nouns. Somewhere, life was moving forward with or without them. But in that moment, in that embrace, Calvin H. Parkinson and Georgia E. Dehner chose to stop running from fear and start running toward something better. Something like hope. Something like love. Something like home. And that's where I'm leaving you today. Don't worry, there's so much more to this story. Will Calvin meet Amara? How will his company react? What happens when Georgia's late husband's family finds out? And what about that business rival who's been waiting for Calvin to show weakness? Part 8 is coming soon, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments. Team Calvin or Team Georgia? Who do you think needs to be braver? I'm reading everything you write. Until next time, remember, love is always worth fighting for, even when you're scared.